Father, we thank you and we praise you for this day and it's time to get together. We pray,
Yes.
Father, that as my dad shares his testimony and seeks to answer the question about hearing your voice in his testimony, Father, I just pray that you would just bless it, guide his words, and help him to stay focused on the purpose of the message. Pray that Chris would be able to join us and that he'll be able to hear what he needs to hear. We thank you for this time and for your blessings. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, I pray. Amen.
Amen. This meeting is being recorded. How do I?
Okay.
Bethany has to handle the technology. I'm not as.
Got it. That's all you need to do.
Oh, she's telling me how easy it is. To start with, we should still be on the road. Okay, we left a day early. And I said to the Lord, and my wife will vouch for this, why? Why did you take us here? What was the purpose of this? I don't understand. Now, I wanted to leave the country, yes. The way I'm going, I want to run away permanently, but that's been since Vietnam because of things that have gone on. But God spoke to my heart as I was driving, and I almost did something I shouldn't on the road because it was a startle to me. And that was, is it enough to obey me and do as I say? And I went, like, yeah, like that. And then he put an image in my head of everybody we were blessed to share with, and there were a lot. We were staying in a lodge that was run by Mormons. Anybody know that Mormonism is not Christianity? Give you an example that helps with that is Satan and Jesus are brothers. That's in the Book of Mormon. Oh, I've read that book.
Mormonism falls under what would be classified as non-Trinitarianism.
Yes.
So we'll actually be touching on that when I teach in 2 weeks, because we'll be going through in discussing the philosophies and whatever you want to call them, theology of the early church. One of the things we'll end up touching on is the various things that popped up after the Reformation. Just in brief, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that, but kind of as a counterpoint, because as I been studying it, that's one of the things that I discovered was there's a lot of early stuff, and then there's a big split right at the Reformation that created a whole ton of basically new religions, if you want to be technical. But I'll go on. Sorry.
No. This is the input I want.
Yeah.
You see, Daniel, you're very welcome, and for you young ladies, I know that you're supposed to be quiet before your elders, but that was the past. Okay, to start with, and that on all things, those people were put in my mind. And I realized that was part of the purpose we were taken there. And we have gotten repeated things from the lodge we stayed at. Thank you. Thank you. I had one this morning. We all want you to know that you were highly appreciated. We were so blessed to have you.
Nice.
I only spoke what the master gave me. That is in Revelations. And that is by the word of their testimony.
Yes.
They love not their lives, unto death. And that's in Revelations. That's what we got to do. We have to share what God tells us, and it'll be, believe you me, it'll be something that's happened in your existence, in your lives. And that's where we're headed this morning. Now, it's sad Chris is not here. I was hoping, but that's fine, because you're going to hear this and you're going to understand. When I was a young man, there were two things that happened to me, and you can both answer these questions later. One, every night that I can think of, either I was flying in the arms of angels, or I was running from a skeleton that was chasing me everywhere I went.
In your dreams.
In my dreams. Second, a dream I had, there was a third dream actually. And in this third dream, it was reaffirmed much later after I met him, because I had it again. I was standing in heaven with all kinds of people. And my friend walked up to me and says, "Come with me." I said, "Okay." And we walked out, and there was a hole. And you've heard me use this concept because this is the concept he gave me, was a hole in the pavement. And he was straddling it, and he pointed down, and I looked at it, and there's this big rock at the bottom with a little bit of light on it. And he told me to go there. And I said, no. Next thing I knew, I was thrown down into that hole. Okay. His disciples came up to him and said, "Lord, Lord, we want to do this and this with you. We want to sit beside you. We want to do all this stuff." And he said, "Wait a moment. That's for the Father to decide. But can you share in the baptism I must go through?" And then he looked at him and said, "Yes, you will." Do you know the only one that did not die from torturous death was who?
Wasn't it John? Wasn't he the only one that lived to old age?
Yes, he did. Yet he was put in a salt mine and beat and forced to work to cut salt. And in his spare time, he was given revelation. Okay. John lived and went back to Ephesus and was considered the bishop of the first church. Technically, the Pope of the first church. Okay. That's John. Now, when I was a young man after I'd met the Lord, technically for my first time humanly, this gentleman was walking with me and said, "I want to hear his voice." And we started to walk on. In the middle of the street, I stopped and I spoke to him and I said, "Are you willing to pay the cost? Are you willing?" And so the title, what little I'm going to share, is "The Price That We Must Pay." He said, "Yes." And I said, and I can't even remember his name. I said, "Do you realize that wasn't me that said that?" He says, "I know, shut up. That was God."
Okay.
I had never even had an idea that God could use a person like that. That was a new experience for me. Since then, he's done a few of those things along the road, but not quite like that, where I'm suddenly a puppet. I prayed later. I said, "Well, you're going to let him hear your voice. What about me?" And he probably laughed because I had already heard his voice and that. So we're going to start with my life, and you need to understand my life. We all have had issues. We've been abused, disliked, isolated, picked on. None of us have had what I would call an easy life. Something has happened throughout our lives that made our lives rough, because God takes what? I think it says in the scripture, if you look at it, the foolish things, the weak things. He makes the weak strong. He makes the foolish smart, so that he can show on their behalf certain things. I was born into a family of 7 children. I'm the second oldest. My dad was in World War II in the South Pacific. He was a Golden Glove boxer on a ship, and he served in the Navy. He was an officer, as his dad had been an officer in the Navy, as his dad's dad had been an officer in the English Navy. Okay? So I was born into this family, and I was born in the state of Washington in a town at that time called Walla Walla. The doctor at the time of my birth wrote in the birth certificate, "He is mine," and he named me with a different name than I have now. He called me Butch. So for my years, I was called Butch for a while. At 4 months of age, I had asthma, and at 4 months of age, my sister, because my parents were fighting like cats and dogs, decided that she was sick of it. She put a pillow over my face. I understand that I was unconscious for a while when they brought me back. I grew up, my dad worked for the government. I grew up and we traveled. We went to many different areas, Spokane, then down to, if I remember right, it was New Mexico. And I remember walking out one day and seeing these beautiful tall trees dying because of lack of water. There was a drought. So I had a cup of water and I poured it on a tree because I wanted the tree to live. My dad saw me doing it and beat me till my mother screamed, "Stop it, Verrie, you're killing him." And I was beat some more later. My dad saying, "You know what they're going to do? They'll charge us for the death of that tree because he poured water on it."
Active child.
Went out in the country with my dad because he used to force us to go. My brother, Jess, who was born during that time, myself, and my dad went out in the country. My dad, this was about, I'm giving you memories, but I'm taking choice memories for a reason. We drove out and we saw a stray dog in the middle of the desert. We had hotcakes for our food. We didn't always have enough food to eat. Had hotcakes. My dad told me that he and Jess needed to go somewhere, and I was to use the hotcakes to draw the dog into the car and sit there with the dog till they got back. Well, I fed the dog the hotcakes and he refused to get in the car and left. Wagged his tail at me. My dad came and said, "Where's the dog?" I said, "Well, it left. He beat me for the dog not being in the car. Beat me really bad." My dad used to always yell, "I wish you would die. Why didn't you die?" I didn't know at that time until years later that my dad had taken out at that point accidental death, a double indemnity. He would have got $10,000 if I died to that dog. We're going to move forward a little bit in time. We came to Nebraska, Cambridge, Nebraska. They hated Jews, hated blacks. And my dad used to take me fishing. I never wanted to go. I was scared to death of the man. But my dad took us fishing and we had this spillway. Now, you figure a little kid, I'm not in school, and a little kid was told to walk down those huge rocks and with a little net and catch a fish my dad had gotten. Well, pretty steep. I managed to get down them. The only thing was the fish came up and his tail was so big, the net was too small. Now, my dad was so overwhelmed by the fish, I didn't get beat that day. But if I'd fallen down that waterfall, I had been dead. My dad took me fish hunting shortly after that, and he had a double-barrel shotgun. I did not want to shoot anything. I don't know why, I never did. But he forced me. He hit me until I put it up, and he said, "You'll aim with your eye and put it right next to your face." It ripped my face open, blackened my eyes. And my dad burst out laughing and laughing till another hunter came up and forced my dad to take me to the hospital. There were many times my dad did things like that. I did not know at the time that he wanted to collect on an insurance policy. We found that out later when the insurance company found us, and we got what? Bethany, how much money did we get out of that policy that was on me?
$1,500.
There was about $1,200 or $1,500 worth left on it. But I know that all the days of my life, my dad continuously screamed at me, "Why don't you die?" In Nebraska, I loved caves because in Carlsbad, New Mexico, we'd go into a cave, right? And if you've ever been Carlsbad Caverns, Oh, wow. For a little boy, that was exciting and overwhelming. Okay. So I dug a hole. There was in the schoolyard, there was this home being put in, and there's this big embankment of earth. So I dug a hole and crawled into it with only my feet sticking out. And some kids rode their bicycle over it, totally collapsing it on me. Now, early in the morning, I went to there. The sun was just coming up, and I went to play. I fell asleep. And then I heard a voice say to me, "Wake up, Verrie, it's time to get out of there." And I tried, but I couldn't get out. And I felt my legs pulled, and I was pulled out. And this man standing there with no shoes on. And I thought that was weird. And then he vanishes in front of my eyes. And I look around, and it's dark. I didn't know what was going on. So I started looking. I had one shoe. And the town bully had my other shoe, and he says, "I took it off your dead body. I'm not giving it back." So when I got home, I was supposed to be back by lunchtime, the usual treatment of being beat. And then being able to go in my room and crawl in a corner. But I heard my dad say, "Lil," he said he was buried alive and the kid took his shoe. So he went out and looked for the guy, got my shoe, because we couldn't afford new shoes, and came back. He says he was dead. Years later, when I got in the medical field, I never thought about it. There's no way I was there all day long without oxygen. You can't do it. As I said, when I thought I met God, he was there orchestrating my life. Now from Nebraska, my dad got transferred to California, Sacramento, California. And we traveled. Now I need to give you some background on my family at this stage, step back. My mom slept with anybody and everybody. My uncle used to yell at my dad and say, "Listen, he looks just like you. He's the only one probably in all your kids that's like you. Why do you beat him up and do that?" He even pulled out a picture and said, and Bethany and I were together, and we both thought it was me. He says, "No, that's your dad."
Wow.
So was the man that delivered me my dad. He had red hair, by the way. He was a rabbi, and he worked at the hospital, and he delivered babies. Or was my human dad my dad? Or I should say, the one I thought of as my dad, my dad. Years later, that was answered for me when my sister, now remember, my sister, I got to go back in time. My sister, my dad was in the Navy. My mom got pregnant with my sister before my dad got back. She was over 6 months pregnant. Her future father-in-law, because her mother was determined to marry the man, raped her and messed her up mentally, and one of her brothers joined in. They don't know whose child she actually was. My older sister, Di. Di could never accept the fact that that was the case, no matter what was said. I used to turn around and get in a fight with these gentlemen. I'd lower the air out of their tires, trying to drive them away from my house. To give you a little bit more of my background, and that, because I mentioned going to California, but I think this needs to be brought in at this stage. My brother Jess was pushed out of an attic of a garage on the jagged concrete and was laying there. I ran home. My mom was with one of her boyfriends. The door was locked. It was a solid oak door with a screen. I calmly took one hand, pulled the screen off, set it aside. The other hand, I pulled the oak door off and set it to the side, walked in and said, Mom, Jess is dying. You need to come. She came out exposed, her boyfriend with her. He took off. And just as she started down the road, she'd thrown a robe on top of herself. The neighbor came carrying my brother. Supernatural blessing and strength there. I've had other episodes of that. My dad was a strange man. He knew this was going on. Every time I tried to tell him about it, because they did, was another beating. When we got to California, we found out my dad had another family. So my dad had two families, and my mom had multiple boyfriends. It was a very healthy, unhealthy family. They taught us how to hate each other. They put us in a ring. I had boxing gloves put on me, and I was ordered to fight my older sister. When I'd knock her down, then my brother. And when all that happened, my dad then would get in the ring and start beating me, telling me that I should have let them win. Never made sense to me. But we went to Sacramento. My grandparents, my dad's parents would never allow Di to come and visit my older sister. They were devout Christians. And they had forbidden the marriage because of what had happened to my mom. What happened to my mom destroyed her mentally, guys. It really did. My mom, every time there's another woman, including my sisters, she attacked them bitterly, telling them they were worthless, they'd fail, they were going to be a disaster, on and on. My wife will testify to this because she heard it. It was hell for my sisters to hear that. I had 3 of them. Is that right?
4.
4 sisters. Goodness gracious, can't even remember my sisters. 4 sisters. Anyway, the last one was born in California. So we went to California, and I started in California, finally, 7th grade. 7th grade teacher found out I couldn't read. I never learned how to read. I couldn't read it at all. It was horrible. So they put me in a remedial class, and I learned how to read. My first book was See Spot Run. 7th grade. My dad took things from me right and left. We went from not celebrating Christmas to Christmas. And I think some of you heard this. I'm trying to skip a lot of stories I could give you. But in California, for an example, my grandparents gave me a 10-speed because my dad had allowed me to have a bicycle in Nebraska. And I used to have to walk 3 miles in the country with a frozen solid, dragging it to deliver newspapers out there in the middle of heavy-duty snowstorms. I remember one time going to school from where we lived. I started early in the morning and got there by noon because they kept falling in snowdrifts and couldn't get out and had to be helped out of them. Now, who is coming along to help me out? But my dad turned around and asked for my combination. I gave it to him. When I got out of school that day from my bicycle, which was chained up, the chain was open. My bicycle was gone. So I walked home. I got beat for walking home and being late. I got beat for the bicycle being taken. Yet I found out years later, my dad paid kids to steal the bicycle. And then he disassembled it and hid it. I lived in terror. The skeleton chased me every night. And one day I was told in a dream, see that hammer? I picked up the hammer and I was told, break that skeleton. I slaughtered it. I slaughtered it. The neighborhood boys were paid to attack me by my dad because there was no law against kids killing kids. One of them took a pot on my head and were smashing it down, and I bit his arm, broke the pot. So then I had to deal with gangs coming out because I in high school bit some kid. They didn't want to hear why I did it. But I developed a situation where to take out my aggression, I took on the bullies. There wasn't a bully in that school that wasn't afraid of me, and later became my friend because they didn't want to fight with Verrie. Somehow I could pick up a bully that was bigger than me and throw him across the room. My football coach was just a little small guy, by the way. He turned around and comes up to me and he says, Verrie, I bet you if I put you in a ring with my players, whatever position you want, you'll take that guy down. And so the biggest bully of the school was in there as a right guard. And I demanded that position. And everybody laughs at me. And I looked at him, I said, you're going down, guy. I knocked him down. Knocked him down again and again. I got the position. That year we didn't win many games, but I got to play football. I wrestled. I held, and probably somebody's beat it. I don't know how many know what bar dips are. Bar dips are where you got two parallel bars and you stand up, put your arms on them, and you got to lower yourself down and up. I set the state of California record. And all the time, I'm sitting back saying, what do I do? And my mom says, Verrie, pray this prayer. If I should die before I awake, my soul, please take. At a certain point in my life, I chose to go in the military. My dad I knew would be very angry if I went in and not into the Navy. But I was running away from him. My front yard was San Francisco. My backyard was Sierra Mountains anyway, and they'd find me occasionally and bring me home. So high school, I never bothered to attend. My freshman year of high school, in my 8th grade class, once I learned to read, I got straight A's. After that, it didn't even bother to go. Too many bullies. So I went into the military and joined the Army. And I still remember this. I came in and I'm standing there with all these guys, right? Trying to get out of it. And I didn't want to get out of it. But they decided it was time to give us a blood test. So they poked a hole in my thumb. I looked at that blood. When I woke up, they said I was swollen in. And I thought, well, adults infantry. So in basic, I was taught how to shoot a rifle. I couldn't miss. So my company commander thought I would be a sniper. You'll never guess what job they gave me. Be a medic. You pass out from the side of your blood, you become a medic. My company commander in the basics said to me, it used to be that if you could ride a horse, you became a foot soldier. If you couldn't ride a horse, they made you ride a horse. You made you cavalry. No wonder why we had such weird stories about the Wild West. The first few weeks we were there, the first day we came into basic, Fort Lewis, Washington, okay? We stood outside all night from California without coats. Many of the kids had bare feet, so did I, in the snow, in the middle of a snowstorm. The next morning, they marched us down the road, and we finally got shoes. They didn't fit. Put us into a barracks with no windows, and the snow used to come in and cover our beds. It was all part of the training, but I knew I was sick. And I tried to go in, but my temperature, because I'm normally 97.6, never got over 99. Well, one day I went to the dispensary, and walking back, because they wouldn't listen to me, I passed out. I woke up in the hospital a long time later. I had double pneumonia. My parents had been called because they had written me off. I still remember as I was waking up, this one guy was next to me doing something with my arm. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, you're friendly vampire, just getting my breakfast." And then I passed out again. My dad refused to come. My mom showed up. They said she waited for almost a week beside my bed. When I was fully awake, she taught me how to blow in this tube to try and get the stuff out of my lungs. Well, we got out of that hospital finally, and I went back, and I was in what they called a recycle platoon. And the drill sergeant said, "Okay, guys, you're the laughing stock of Fort Lewis, Washington. What is it going to be? Are you going to be the laughing stock, or are you going to beat those people and prove that you can do it?" My platoon became the best in marching. I couldn't tell my right hand from the left, so they made me a corporal. Gave me my own room. Mainly, it was because I coughed so bad, they said I was keeping everybody awake. But they gave me my own room. And I would call cadence. Oh my goodness. But we outran them. We outfought them in our war games. We won every single thing we did. And then it came down, as I said, to the end when we were supposed to go. And I should have gone as a sniper. And the orders didn't come down. 2 extra weeks I stayed there waiting. And finally orders came down to go to Fort Sam Houston. Well, no, Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And I went there to train to be a medic. This one officer and sergeant kept looking at me because I got sick looking at the films. They were actual films from the war. And they said, "You'll never survive. You won't make it." I said, "I know, I don't know what to do." So they tried to get me in truck driver school. So I learned how to drive heavy truck. But the government needed medics so bad, they changed my MOS back to medic. But someone got me into Denver, Colorado. Fitzsimmons General Hospital had the only program in the nation because they didn't have enough doctors. Was it to train people to be a doctor's assistant? Now remember, I flunked high school. Maybe because I didn't show up. But 7 days a week, I went to school. In the evenings, I was put in the OR. And I used to wonder why they had so many people in the OR, and they dragged me out because I'd pass out. They put me in emergency. One day I was sitting at a table, eating, talking with a friend of mine from the surgery, and we were talking about the case we had had, and everybody got up from the table, and some of them were quite green and white. And they said, "Please, you're making us sick." And I realized I'd gotten past my problem I had. But in that OR, they were doing something that really grieved my heart. And you need to understand a little bit more about my family. My family, my granddad step-granddad, my mom's side, who had raped her, was a US senator from the state of Washington. My family was tied deeply into the political Democratic Party. Okay? Now, I looked and I was watching. They'd bring in these young teenage girls. And the place would have, well, the parents were there and all that, and the surgery. There would be all kinds of female people, nurses, and then they would kick them out and it'd be just men and take bets on whether they're virgins or not. I reported this to Congress. Next thing I knew, there was trying to think of what they call it, but they came down on that base like a ton of brick. The post commander was demoted and fined. A lot of people lost their rank. Then they found out who had informed on them, and they showed me this file that was, I don't have a book that thick, but let's just put it this way. It was about an inch thick. And they said, these are the charges against you. And they put me in the MP dungeon, as they called it. There was no window. Contrary to these movies of the windows and all that, there's no window. There's a broken toilet. There was no mattress on the wires of the bed. I could not see, there was no lighting down there. I have no idea other than the season changed. And one day, this MP comes up and he says, listen, Verrie, we got a phone call. You need to come out and take it. And I went out and I took the phone call. And Congressman Moss from the state of California, I believe he was also, believe it or not, a Democrat. So you can see my family's ties. He said, we found you. They went before the Intelligence Committee with your file and we laughed them out. He said, we've got you out of jail, but I have bad news for you. You have orders have been cut for Vietnam. Now we can change those orders and you can go anywhere in the world you want. And I said, yes, but you know how much the Army hates me for what I did. They said, we can't help that. I said, what if I leave the States? Can you guys intervene again? We can try. I said, send me to Nam. And so I was sent to Vietnam. Before I left that night, and that I got myself very drunk. Sacramento, California, driving in a car with some friends of mine that were going. Cops pulled us over, found the open cans of booze, took us in. The judge happened to be there. He took one look at us. He says, you know, you look like soldiers. Yeah, yes, sir, we said, drunk as skunks. And he said, why are you drunk and driving? Well, because we're going to Nam tomorrow. That judge turned and rebuked the police, ordered them to put us back in that car and replace the booze they had taken away from us. The next morning, drunk as a skunk, I was put on the plane and a song was singing, going through the cockpit as we took off from Travis Air Force Base in California, leaving, I don't know if any of you remember this, on a jet plane. I don't know when I'll be back again. Arrived in Nam in the middle of an artillery situation. Dove in a hole in the ground. Two people's eardrums burst because of the way they brought the plane in, and they went to Japan and were out of the war because they couldn't hear anymore. And then I walked in with the orders in my hand and handed it to him. And the guy says, looking at my orders, he says, have you read these? I said, no, they told me they put me back in the brig. So he says, you don't want to go there. That is so far up north that it changes almost on a daily basis as to who has that place. He says, we have a better place for you. Would you mind going and joining a group of people? They kind of need a medic pretty bad. I said, sure. I don't want to be in the enemy. I side one day and our side the next, if that were possible. So I got on a chopper that was waiting and took me and met my guys who took care of me. Okay. Now I'm going to grab one story from that war so you get an idea of God still being involved, and he was. We had been ambushed over and over again. We'd receive orders to go to a certain place with the route laid out to us, and the enemy would be waiting. We started going around the backside. We went to the place we were ordered to go, but we went a different route than they ordered us to, and we started ambushing the enemy. One day we got a North Vietnamese officer. I kept him alive. And we got, because we wanted to find out who was given the intel, who was setting us up in our own military. I can only tell you, the gentleman turned out to be a congressman after a while. And now you understand more of why I wanted to leave the country. Became in the House of Representatives. But we went on that helicopter. They made me lay in a basket. The patient was in the other basket. There's no room inside this type of helicopter. And I was in the other to counterbalance the weight, and we flew. And I'm thinking all that time is they shoot from the trees at us. When we got back to a rear base, I think it was called Long Bin at that time, and we landed, they took him off, took him in, and they covered him with a sheet and said he's dead. I said, he's not dead. I just checked him. How dare you? They said he's dead. I pulled my 45 from my side, pointed it at the doctors that were there and said, I'm going to shoot. Either you take care of my prisoner so I can get my information, or I'm shooting you. My guys could not afford to lose me. And I pulled the trigger back on that old-fashioned gun. So they took a look at him. They said, well, we can stabilize him, and yes, we can get him there. But you know, they'll kill him. That's what they do. They either throw him out the choppers or they'll kill him once we get him there. I said, no, they won't. Well, they said, well, you need to find an ambulance driver. I went out and found a guy high on drugs, agreed to drive an ambulance. Probably if he had been sober, he would have said no. The MPs that came in while I was pointing the weapon at the doctors and pointed their weapons at us, or at me, I should say, it was just me, agreed to accompany it, go with us. Mexican standoff, you know, they would have killed me in a moment. Anyway, so we went, the MPs in front of us and me in this ambulance. Now in Vietnam, there were 4 people that are top priority for the enemy to kill. I don't know if you know what they were, but number 1 was a medic, because the troops wouldn't fight without someone put a Band-Aid on them. 2 was the officers. 3 was a helicopter gunman. Who do you think was the 4th? The people that called in for help so we could get someone to come in with the gunships. The only problem is sometimes they shot us too, but that's another story we don't want to get into. So we went with that, and it was a cracker box. Have you all seen MASH?
Yeah.
That's what we rode in, and I rode in, taking care of my patient, sitting in the front seat with the guy. When we came to this town, there's so many craters. This area had just been in a battle, and the enemy had, I don't know, I assume after seeing the guy, taken it. So we're traveling through this village that was just potted and had to slow to almost a stop. And this man steps out, a North Vietnamese regular, steps out of the shadows of the building, points his weapon at us, his AK, at me. And I knew in that instance, that bullet would go through my head and the head of the driver. He'd get 2 for 1. He got $500 US for every medic he killed. That was, in those days, enough for those people to retire on. And if he let us live, he would be killed by his own side. Well, you know, I couldn't live, so that's the end of the story. Except for the fact is, he lowered his weapon and ran. He ran back into the shadows. The driver, who had sobered up from his drugs a bit, said, "Wow, somebody up there likes us." Well, we got the patient to where we needed to go. When I got back to the base, I found out the MP Jeep that was ahead of us was lost. They figured they were both killed, both the MPs. But God kept me going. Now the time came for us to go back to the States. And we got on a plane, and guess which song they were playing? "Coming into Los Angeles, Mr. Custom Agent, bringing in a couple of keys." Anybody remember that one? "Please, Mr. Custom Agent, don't search my baggage." I'm probably singing it wrong. It's been years. So I began to think my life was a song. And we came in to Travis Air Force Base, believe it or not, again. And the whole time I was in Nam, I got one letter from my family, and that was a bill for a phone call I made. My dad wanted the money plus interest for the payment of the phone. My fiance I had at the time, and that's another story, gave me a Dear John letter. She wanted somebody in a relationship by the name of Jesus. And I met with the guys around one of the fire pits we had. We talked about it. And we had a Jose in there. I thought it was Jose because of the Jesus. That's right, Jesus, because the name was spelled the same way. And they said, "Hey man, you can't have two guys in the same relationship. Tell her to choose you or him." She never wrote again. That was about middle of Vietnam. Found out later it was our friend. And he was trying to tell me about him. Well, got back in the States, right? Went down, had no money because you see in Saigon, they strip searched us and I had 5,000 military currency on me. They stole it all. They were looking for gold and jewels, our troops, our officers, and they took it all. They strip searched us all. In Japan, they put us through a strip search again. So we had nothing. I got into the Air Force Base. I had no money to get home. Of course, my folks I knew wouldn't be there. I hitchhiked to Southern California where my brother was waiting. He had to wait till I was back and reported my next base before he could be shipped out to Vietnam. That's the way they worked in that day. So I asked him if I could borrow his motorcycle. Okay. He told me I could. I wished him luck and told him I wish you weren't going. It's not a nice place to go. You're going to get shot at. He was one of those people that sat in the helicopter and fired the big heavy machine guns. Got back to where my folks were. They let me in the house. My mom did, actually. My dad was gone at the time. And I got my brother's motorcycle out, and I couldn't figure out how to ride it. Some guy I knew before I went in said, "Oh, I know how to ride those." He rode it over to the south side. We were in the north side of Sacramento to the south side of Sacramento. And at least he had me put on the helmet. And he told me, "Okay, now rev it all the way up." I did. And hold the clutch in. I did. Then he said, "Okay, now let the clutch out." I went down the street on one wheel. I'd made it for the war. Now, believe you me, a guy blew up right next to me, all kinds of stuff. Other stories I did not bring in, don't have time. And going down the street, and I front wheel started going down. I didn't know how to turn it, to shift it. I didn't know what to do. Went down the street and there's a car. Now, the thought goes through my mind is, this is my brother's bike. I can't damage it. How do you turn this thing? Does it turn like a bicycle? Had all that in the fractions of seconds before we hit. The motorcycle, because of my actions, did not hit the car. And as I'm going down the street, you know, and just like a rocket out of control, my left knee hit the front part of the car and I split the bones that was showing all the way down to the ankles.
Mention it was a parked car.
Oh, my wife says I have to tell you the part more of the story. And I say part more. It was a parked car. I flew up and hit with a helmet, my head, and the helmet split off my head. I have a crease in my skull here. Went up in the air, way up in the air, came down on this wrist and shattered it. There's still a white spot here, all the way up to the elbow. It was in pieces. And there were a few other things. Those are the ones I remember. And laid there in a pool of what I thought was my sweat. And my friend Dave comes up and says, "Oh my God, I killed you. I killed you." And I said, "Dave, I'm not dead. I'm in agony." He wasn't doing anything. We had a crowd of people around us. I'd been a medic in a war, shot at, rocketed. People died in my arms. And I turned around and I said, "Enough." I took control of the situation. It's like a spirit came into me, and I know where that came from. That was God. And I said, "Listen, I'm going in shock. Get me a blanket. Someone call the police. Someone call an ambulance." The ambulance got there. They walked around me, the two guys, repeatedly for a while. And then finally, they put all kinds of restraints and everything from my head on, trying to hold me together. And they got a sheet of plastic, and they got 5 men to help them. And they worked that underneath of me. And then they got on both sides, picked me up, put me on the gurney, put me in the ambulance, and I passed out. I came to with this group of people with masks on their face, like some of us do today. And they were doing things. And I'm looking around, and the doctor says, "Nurse, let's check and see how bad that is on his forehead. Would you please wipe the blood away?" Doctor told me later, he says, "That's the only time I thought I lost you. You went in shock so deep, we had to use the paddles to bring you back." Now, to move the story forward a bit, you have to understand there's a price for the life I've lived and I'm living. And you got to be willing to pay a price. Are you willing? As the one young man asked, and that I want to hear God's voice. And the word that came to me was, are you willing to pay the price? Are you willing to pay the cost? Well, move forward. I'm crippled. They tell me I'll never walk again. They put me on a bus, send me home. I go and work in South Lake Tahoe because that was, by the way, that place just burnt due to that fire. But I was working in Harris Club. It was run by the mob. It still is, probably. They took care of us, gave me a false ID because I was too young. See, I went to war at 18, by the way. You had to be 21 to work there. And I'd worked with a young man by the name of Dante. And Dante, bless his heart, became an officer in Homeland Security. He called me up one day to remind me of all this. I heard in the middle of the night, my name, Verrie. I got up, dragged myself into his room to wake him up. We'd done a double shift. We'd done 16 hours straight working. Well, he was pretty mad at me for waking him up. He was bigger than me, big, huge guy. Went back to bed. Then I heard my name again, Verrie. And I went in there. Well, he helped get me back to bed and told me he would turn me into something I didn't want to be if I woke him up again. And I realized as I laid there, he didn't know my name. Nobody knew my name. So I kept looking up in great fear. Great fear. Drove around the lake, drinking until I was drunk. That seemed to be my theme in those days. 2 months later, I'd given him several stipulations. I wanted my fiance back. I wanted my parents who had disowned me back. I wanted to go to school, though I'd flunked high school. Well, my folks showed up at Christmas with a whole pile of gifts. I never got a Christmas present in my life. I never was hugged. I was always told I was hated. They didn't say they loved me, but they had Christmas gifts. And asked me to come home. I was still crippled. 2 months later, I got a ride down the mountain, went home. I was there. My dad was getting sick at me. He was still trying to knock me around. And a friend of mine that I used to get in trouble with, John, was a great guy. We would get on the other side of this one place, these police cars had to go under this rail bridge. And right next to it, where it's the opening into the big sewer system in Sacramento, you can stand up on those. And they would come and we'd get these eggs so rotten, we'd throw them in the windows. And John shows up and says, Verrie, I want you to go to church with me. I laughed at him. And he was serious. My dad, who was anti anything to do with Christianity, said to me, go. Well, I went. He took me forward that night and they prayed for me. And John turns to me and says, I've never, ever heard God speak. He says, he's going to heal you. Get out of your wheelchair. That's what he told me. I couldn't. Well, I didn't get healed. You know, I can't walk because my left leg is totally gone. That's the one I'm jumping up and down on, right? Short time later, in the middle of the night, well, it wasn't the middle of the night, it was actually evening, but it was dark in there. I turned out the lights. This light shone on me and I said, knew it was God. And I said, if you're really real, I don't believe in you at all. If you're really real, I refuse to sit in a church pew. Either you put me to work or forget it, man. And that's when the light shone on me. And I met him. He took my word like that. I had a flat tire in my car. 2 guys came by, changed it. And I said, guess what happened to me? You became a Christian. We can tell. You changed. You should see a picture of you. You look so dark. And now you look like you're aglow with light. When that kid asked that question, the cost, you can hear my life, the whole life has been a cost. Everywhere I've gone, I've had people try to kill me and do away with me. I can tell you why, but that's another time. We must bring this to a close. You've gotten up to the point and lost probably 2 times the amount of time of stories that I could have told you of God's intervention. He singled me out from before I was born and has brought me to here. He is in control and I'm but his tool. If tomorrow he wants to put me in hell, that's his business. If he wants to turn around and restore my health, that's his business. But he is real and he is in control. So ask your questions. Do you really want to know and hear his voice? My sheep hear my voice. Our problem is he speaks all the time, but we have our voice, the enemy's voice, and his. He never has contradicted the book. And you can learn how, if you're willing, to know the difference. I've had friends I've taught that, and they've sat down and watched God bring about things he said to them. He is real. He is so real that he's more real than sometimes I think everything around us. I would love to go on, but I've filled your ears with an hour of a short story. Well, short story, long story. So thank you all for bearing with me for that hour. But remember, there's a price. I have paid it all my life. My first hug was from my wife's dad. I'd never been held. I'd never been hugged. I'd never been told I was loved. The only words I ever heard was, I hate you. Why won't you die? And then, of course, we found out, yeah, what he had done. My dad, I prayed for, I witnessed to, and before he died, he gave his heart. In spite of all he did to me, he gave his heart. I did not give up. My mom, I thought I'd give up many times. She called me up. She said, Verrie, I've just given my heart to the Lord. Can you ever forgive me? I said, Mom, if I can, he can. So I've been blessed. I may not have had a life like some people where someone says, I love you, or they hold you like a child or whatever, but I will see them again. And I am glad. So we're going to turn around and we're going to have a prayer to close. Bethany, you want to close this? And then we'll have the prayer requests.
Father, we
Yes,
do
Father.
thank and praise you for allowing Verrie to share his life and how you touched him throughout his life and how you brought him to you. We thank you and praise you for everything and ask that you bless each one this day and this week coming up. In the name of Jesus, in the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.